Senator from South Carolina is
Are we in a
recognized.
quorum call?
We're not.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will be speaking here for a few minutes about the upcoming War Powers Resolution vote. First, I'd like to introduce into the record a Wall Street Journal editorial about the War Powers Act, if I may. Thank you. So I've been asked a lot about this in a prior life. I used to be a judge advocate in the Air Force for about 33 years, prosecutor, defense attorney, and a military judge for a very short period of time, and I enjoyed it very much. So this part of the law has been part of my life, and the body is going to make a big vote today, and I think it is a consequential vote. And simply put, here's my understanding of the Constitution and how Congress and the President and the courts interact when it comes to making war. No president has the ability to put America in a state of war. That is reserved to the Congress. It says in the Constitution, only Congress can declare war. When you look at the history of the country, we've declared war, Congress says, 5 times in the last 250 years. So declaring war is an unusual thing by the Congress. The War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, World War I, and World War II. So I would suggest that declaring war is something America doesn't do a lot, and that's probably a good reason. When you declare war, it affects insurance contracts. It's a legal state that has a lot of consequence to it. So we've done that 5 times as a nation. Wonder how many times a commander-in-chief has used military force to defend the nation without a declaration of war. Hundreds, if not thousands of times in the last 250 years. So the norm in this country is that military conflicts are not carried on under a declaration of war. Military conflicts, which they've been a lot of, Korea, Vietnam, on and on and on, are engaged in by a commander-in-chief who feels a need to use military force depending on what the threat is. The question before the body is, can the Congress stop a military conflict declared by the commander-in-chief because we don't agree with their decision, and without our approval, it must end? And the answer unequivocally to me is no. Under the Constitution, the authority to be commander-in-chief resides exclusively with the president. The power to declare war is exclusive to the Congress. Now, what could the Congress do constitutionally if they disagree with a military action that's not a declaration of war? We could cut off funding. The Constitution reserves the right of the Congress, beginning in the House, to appropriate money. So if there's a military engagement out there, you just pick the topic, and as a member of Congress, you think America should not be in this conflict, constitutionally, you could terminate funding, and that would be a constitutional check and balance on the president's ability to use military force. The second thing you could do as a member of Congress, if you thought the president was doing something wrong by using the military, is you could do an article of impeachment. Somehow create a high crime or misdemeanor that the use of force in this circumstance is a high crime and misdemeanor, and impeach the president. Those are 2 things that Congress can do to check and balance a president. The one thing we can't do, in my opinion, is to substitute our judgment for that of the commander-in-chief about a military operation. Because if that's the case, then you don't have a single commander-in-chief, you have 535 commander-in-chiefs. There's never been in the history of the country a termination of military activity based on the idea Congress did not approve it. There have been a lot of military operations authorized by Congress. There have been a lot of military operations not authorized by Congress. The question of the War Powers Act is what we're talking about. In 1973, the frustration with the Vietnam War, Congress passed a statute that required the commander-in-chief to notify Congress about engaging in hostilities within a specific period of time, to make reports to Congress at the end of a defined period. I think it's 60 days, I can't remember. If Congress hasn't approved those hostilities, then they must be terminated. I think the War Powers Act is an obvious constitutional infringement on the ability of the commander-in-chief to conduct military operations. Because the War Powers Act, at its heart, takes away the ability of the commander-in-chief to decide military matters, and it resides with us. If you can terminate a commander-in-chief's decision through the War Powers Act, then that constitutional authority has been taken by us, the Congress. And that would be a disaster for this country. So I would argue that the War Powers Act is on its face unconstitutional. Reagan and a bunch of other presidents have said the same thing. The day that we terminate a military operation based on the idea that we haven't authorized it, then we become commander-in-chief, we the Congress. That power has been taken from the designated commander-in-chief and usurped by us. That would be a disaster for our country. It would create paralysis at a time of need. Now, presidents have informed us of military actions under the War Powers Act, arguing the act is unconstitutional. I would continue to do that if I were a commander-in-chief. I would inform the Congress. I would brief the Congress about what I'm going to do or not do using our military. Just, I think, is good public policy. But the vote we're going to take this afternoon is basically we're going to vote as the United States Senate to terminate actions taken by President Trump regarding drug cartels. And I think the day we do that, then we're saying to the world that really the commander-in-chief is the Congress, not the president. And if you don't like what President Trump's doing with drug boats and other activity in the Caribbean or anywhere else, you could pass a law saying no funds can be used for the purposes of these operations. And I've been told by my colleagues, well, that's hard. Well, it's meant to be hard. The president can veto any law we pass, and the only way we can override that veto is to get 2/3 of the body. It's meant to be hard. It requires us to find consensus. So to my colleagues, please do not be confused about this. Never in the history of our country has a Congress terminated a military action because they did not give permission to the commander-in-chief. Never in the history of the country the Supreme Court ruled that the Congress has the power to terminate hostilities simply because they disagree with the president. Because today that becomes the norm, then you've taken the power of the commander-in-chief away from the president, you conferred it upon us. So this is a big vote. This is a consequential vote. And what I'm saying, I think, makes eminent sense. By making the commander-in-chief a single person, the president, sitting atop the military, you create a structure and order. If to get military action up and running and sustained, you had to have a vote of 535 people, it would be chaos. If you don't like what the president's doing, then again, the remedy is to use your constitutional tools as a member of Congress, which is funding, not replacing your judgment for that of the commander-in-chief. I've said that about Obama, Clinton, everybody. That's just my view. In 1989, President Bush, 41, used military force to take down Manuel Noriega, the leader of Panama, and he was indicted and put in American prison for being a drug lord, a drug kingpin. That was done without authorization of Congress. I think President Bush 41 was right to take Noriega down. We can't tolerate nation states in our backyard becoming narco-terrorist centers. And that takes us to Venezuela. The President Trump has decided that these drug boats being operated by narco-terrorists emanating from Venezuela are a national security threat to our nation. I think he's right in his assessment. All of these boats coming to our shores, headed for our shores, have drugs. And drugs are killing more Americans than any terrorist group out there. Fentanyl comes from China through Mexico. But cocaine production was up 85% over the last 4 years, and cocaine has destroyed a lot of lives in our country. So these drug boats are being interdicted by the military because President Trump believes that narco-terrorism is a national security threat to our country, and he is using the military in that endeavor, not law enforcement. I think he's right. Some people say, have the Coast Guard stop the boat. Well, the Coast Guard is military and is civilian. I like the idea that our commander-in-chief is telling narco-terrorist organizations, you're not only a foreign terrorist organization, but when you engage in threats to our country, a boat headed to America full of drugs, we're going to take you out. That's going to stop the flow of drugs. We've secured the border, but we now need to go to the networks that produce the products and distribute the products that eventually come to our shores and kill Americans. As to Venezuela, I would argue it's a narco-terrorist state. It is not a sovereign country in the sense of international law. That the leader of Venezuela, Maduro, is an indicted drug dealer with a $50 million bounty from the United States. That the recent election was stolen by Maduro. He's not a legitimate president under the laws of Venezuela, and he's not recognized as being legitimate by a multitude of international bodies. So I would say that Venezuela, in the hands of Maduro, is an existential threat to the people of the United States. That is a narco-terrorist state run by a drug kingpin that's used as a base of operations to send deadly drugs into our country, and it needs to stop. And whatever power that President Trump would like to use to stop that, I think he has the authority under the Constitution. And if we don't like it as Congress, we can defund the military operations. We can't replace our judgment for his. Finally, Maduro and Hezbollah have a long connection. The president of the presiding officer of the Senate is a great senator who understands national security. He's ambassador to Japan. He's been a great addition to this body. Hezbollah connections to Venezuela go way back. Hezbollah is a Mideast terrorist organization, Shiite, connected to Iran, that has a lot of American blood on its hands, 241 Marines killed at the end of a runway in Beirut in the 80s by Hezbollah. They're running out of money because President Trump has really isolated Iran, their benefactor. So now they're upping their game by associating with Maduro. Maduro now has a business relationship with Hezbollah at a level we haven't seen before. Funding this terrorist organization from narco-terrorist activity in Venezuela threatens America's interests in the Mideast. This is not a hypothetical connection, it is a real connection. So I am hoping that the body will understand that what President Trump is doing is not only lawful, but necessary. We have a drug caliphate in our backyard. We have Mexico, we have Colombia, we have Venezuela, and we have Cuba. These are all nations, some of them are allied with us, that have enormous drug problems, and they've lost their sovereignty in Mexico over parts of the country. But I'm focused on Venezuela. Venezuela truly is not a legitimate government under Maduro. He stole the election. He's an indicted drug dealer. It is not legitimate. It is a threat to the United States. So I'm glad to see that President Trump has put narco-terrorist drug organizations and countries that support them on notice that we will fight back to protect our people. And as these drug boats flow toward us, I think President Trump sees it as a killing machine. If a boat full of al-Qaeda guys were coming to the United States, what's the right answer? Blow them up before they get here. If you got a drug boat full of drugs run by narco-terrorists associated with Mideast terrorists, blow them up before they get here. But we got to do more than blow up the boat. We got to go to the problem on the land. Who loads the boats? Who makes the money off the boats? So I don't know where this is going in Venezuela, but I know this. President Trump has said that Maduro's days are numbered. They should be. What I like a lot about President Trump, he's a man of peace until he's not. He is seeking peace all over the planet. He stopped 8 conflicts. He will be the first one to tell you that. I like the idea of a president wanting to make peace, not war. But he's a man not to be trifled with. I think he has decided early on that narco-terrorism emanating from our backyard is not going to be tolerated any longer. There's a new game in town. You do this at your own risk. And I just want to let him know and the country know, not only do I think he has the legal authority, I think he's doing the right thing. You're saving a lot of lives by stopping this boat traffic from getting to our shores. And if you need to take down the organization that funds the boats and supplies the boats, that's a direct threat to the United States associated with Mideast terrorist organizations, tell us what you're up to, but do what you have to protect America. So at 5 o'clock, we're going to take a very consequential vote. And I would urge my colleagues, whether you like President Trump or not, whether you agree with him about politics, this is bigger than you and it's bigger than him. I did the same thing for Obama. When he went into Pakistan to kill bin Laden, I didn't think for 1 minute Congress had to authorize that action. He was taking out a mastermind of terrorism that made us safer. It was in a sovereign country called Pakistan that was no longer reliable when it came to policing bin Laden. I supported that operation because he had the legal authority and it was the right thing to do. I supported President Bush 41. I supported Reagan when he went into Grenada to take down building Cuban influence, where Cubans were beginning to have a footprint in Grenada that was adverse to our national security interests when Cuba was aligned with Russia and other bad actors. So we've had a policy of policing our backyard. But this vote, Senator Kaine is a good friend, we just see things different. He's saying in America there is really not a single commander-in-chief. He's saying in America you can't conduct hostile actions unless the Congress as a body approves it. What he's saying is what the Constitution rejects. If they wanted us, as the framers of the Constitution, to give approval to continue hostilities, they would have done so. They resided in us the power to declare war, and that's the power reserved us, but that doesn't mean the president can't use military force when necessary to protect our nation without a declaration of war. And the reason I know that's true, we've only declared war 5 times in 250 years, and we've had hundreds of military operations, some authorized, some not. So to my colleagues today, please understand this constitutional check and balance has served our country well for 250 years. We live in polarized times. Don't let your emotions drive you into doing something that would weaken our nation. I can't think of anything more critical to weakening our nation than to have Congress be the commander-in-chief. Us, 535 people, have a hard time deciding when to go to lunch. So I'm hoping that this resolution, well-intended, will be voted down, not because I like President Trump, because I believe the constitutional structure that was created a long time ago has served us well as a nation, and if we vote to change that structure, we will do great damage to our nation and our national security. So I would urge a no vote this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield.